So welcome, Kate Bora here with colleague Fiona Pearman.
Hi, everyone.
And I guess we have just come out of our Women at Work Roundtable discussion that we have done with 50 amazing women and men in the room, having some really good conversation around the research from our Women at Work. So guests wanted to jump on, particularly for those that couldn't join us, and just share, some of what was discussed in the room, some of the key findings, to make it a little bit easier to digest. But I think more importantly, Fee, to really look at how do we start to leverage the information that's in here, the stories, the messages that we've heard from women here in Australia.
There's so many good conversations and so many good points people are raising. And I think that was the purpose of bringing together, a lot of quite senior people who are possibly thinking about this in their organisation, possibly having conversations, but they were looking for some more resources, some more ideas, and together we could think about how do we address some of the issues that came up through the research.
Yeah. So let's jump in. We want to start with, I guess, the Australian landscape. Not everyone is as close to this stuff as you and I are. So let's talk a little bit around the data that we're seeing at the moment. Certainly we've made progress, but perhaps not as much as we think we have. So in terms of the key data points, the latest WGEA data shows us that 75% of reporting organisations have a gender equality strategy or policy. I think great news.
Yes.
But only 3 in 10 actually have management KPIs around achieving gender equality related outcomes. And I think this is always crucial. We always say what gets measured gets done. And again, that comes out as a concern in the WGEA work.
Yes, yeah. We know that people think it's important, but until it is part of the practices of the organisation and still it's embedded in the way we do the work, it will still be a nice to have rather than a must have.
Yeah, and I think some of the messages today was we have all this infrastructure, we have policy, we have all of this, but there are still some critical power dynamics going on in organisations that prevent us closing the gender pay gap, that prevent people speaking up and stopping inappropriate behaviour, and that I guess perpetrate or facilitate some of the situations and results that we've seen come through the data.
Sure.
And the last, the gender pay gap, my all-time favourite, as we always say, has remained relatively steady, hovering between 15 and 19% over the past 20 years. The other key pieces around female progression, so basically 47% or pretty much half of graduates are women. By the time we get up to the pointy end of organisations, 35% of senior managers are female. It goes down to 17% of CEOs and 5% of ASX 200 CEOs. I'd suggest certainly on the CEO level, that's probably higher than it was 5-10 years ago. So we've made some traction there. But when you look at the pipeline, the on-ramp is half, and then it dramatically decreases as you go up. There seems to be something in the way here.
Yes, definitely. That ability to progress beyond kind of a fairly junior or mid-manager level does seem to be a problem, and organisations are identifying that female talent pipeline is not where they'd like it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one around workforce participation, which we know plays a big part in the gender pay gap calculation, but 67% of males work full-time, while only 40% of women work full-time. So, the flip side of this is we have a lot of women still working part-time. I think an interesting one here is when we're in we're in the city, CBD, Sydney CBD, if we're surrounded, our colleagues, our friends are all, full-time working professionals, I think we're a little bit disconnected from perhaps more broader society here. And so, underemployment, women
Definitely.
who don't feel like they've got a choice, that it's too hard to work full-time and who are working part-time. Interestingly, we won't touch on it today, but we did look at flex and the conversation around part-time in the research, and certainly, part-time isn't cracking up. To be all, it's 47% of women says it's difficult to work part-time and have a career, and 40% believe that being a part-time manager is an option in their organisation. So by being part-time, and we've seen this in the focus groups we've done with clients, by being part-time, actually I'm limiting my career options.
Yes, it's a really tricky one, this one. We get that people want to do more than one role, and they want to be free to do other things. But there is a cost to career, and I think there's a cost more broadly to society when we have one gender in the population bearing this part-time work far more than the other. Not that we shouldn't have part-time work, but why aren't we sharing it more?
Yeah. So let's jump in now. We've got some background. Let's talk about some of the key findings. Essentially, I guess 3 high-level pieces where there were some really interesting stories. The first around increasing women's confidence, their clarity in their ownership. The second around addressing the gender pay gap. And the third around saying no to bullying and harassment. I think for us, we weren't surprised that these were the headline categories. Perhaps a little surprised by the findings within them, though.
Yes, I think there's this piece where, we want to believe that things are improving, and look, they are on some level, but there's also this piece that when we get into the deeper data and we see people's lived experience, actually there is some quite disturbing things happening, and there's some pieces here that organisations would be wise to pay attention to and to start thinking about how we're going to address this.
So let's focus on the first to start with, all around career progression. So the research really clearly showed us, and I think this was some positive stories. Women are satisfied with their jobs. 76% of women are satisfied with their job. 84% are using their skill and capability. I think this is probably higher than what I expected. Certainly higher than what I would see generally in engagement survey data. Yes. But I think a good news story here around, yes, I'm happy. Yes, I'm satisfied, and I'm using my skill, capability, and experience. So a nice message. There. Oh, there we go. And opportunities are accessible and available. So, 67%, again, this was consistent. 67% of women said, people are chosen for jobs based on competence to perform. They have the same opportunities for promotion as anyone else with their skill, capability, experience. So opportunities are accessible, and I feel like I've got an equal opportunity to apply, and have had the opportunity to apply for a more senior role in the past 3 to 5 years. Probably not super surprising, that one.
Yes, definitely there's, we're making progress, and people are recognising that this is an important issue, and their organisations are trying to do something about it.
Yeah. And of course, I always like to find out where people are at with, decisions around leaving. So, 2 in 5 women have considered leaving their organisation because they don't see career progression, career path available to them. I guess probably on the low side, I thought. I expected it to be a little bit higher. So, I think, a little bit on the low side.
It's still 40%. So, that's still something I think organisations to take note of. If women are saying they're relatively happy, but 40% is thinking about leaving, what's going on there?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Particularly given, the overall data says, I'm satisfied. I am using my skills and capabilities. My organisation, there's policies. They value gender equality. The data on Flex that came through was really, again, quite surprising, but impressive. 79% of women are satisfied with the flexibility of the hours in their job. 58% believe work practices are applied consistently across their organisation, and work and Flex is being role modelled. So there's a beautiful story coming through the data on Flex, and I think that's a reflection of what's going on at probably big business as opposed to small business.
Yes.
But I think when you hold that and you hold satisfaction, and 40% is still thinking of leaving, I think that actually anchors up that result a little bit more.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
We then asked the question, if you have had opportunity to apply for more senior roles, what has stopped you from applying for those roles? And I think this was interesting. These themes of confidence and loyalty really came through here, and really segues into the work we've been doing in Core Confidence. So you'll see 25% of women said, I felt like I needed to stay in my current role a little longer to be fair to my employer. A conversation I've had with plenty of clients, but this piece that I need to stay because there's I feel like it's not fair if I leave.
Yeah, that I owe them something. Yeah. In some cases, I suspect this could be misplaced loyalty. I think, yes, obviously we do want to honour, the advantages we've been given and what we're given through a workplace, but we also have to be mindful about where can we make the best contribution, and maybe it's no longer here. So that's just to be conscious of where is that decision coming from.
Yeah. And the next two talk about, I didn't think they'd hire me because I didn't meet the qualifications or what was required of the role. And the first one, 23% said I didn't want to waste my time and energy. 22% said I didn't want to put myself out there if I was likely to fail. So again, a subject we're really close to around fear of failure here. But again, a lot of this is story. I often say when we look at, job ads and job roles, that is just a wish list. That doesn't mean there's a human out there who has all of those. So I think there's an interesting story going on here around confidence. And 18%, I was following the guidelines about who should apply. To my point earlier, it doesn't mean that there is a human that exists. So this whole thing of needing to follow the rules, I think this is a really interesting one, because if you apply for something and it goes no further, there's not really, apart from not hearing anything, there's not a huge negative consequence of that.
No, it's not as though you're risking a lot to give it a go. And, as we say, just have the experience of, maybe you'll get something you weren't anticipating. That's great. And if it's a bit of rejection, well, that doesn't go astray either.
And it's actually good, practicing what it feels like to get comfortable with that. I think that's, I think if you reframe it, said, okay, if I set you a goal that said, go out, apply for 10 roles, I want you to be rejected at least from 7 out of 10 of them. All of a sudden you've got a goal, right? That you want to achieve. I think it's a good thing to get,
get used to that discomfort. Just go with it.
Yeah. So we asked the questions, what barriers do you believe are hindering your career progression? Interestingly, only 14% said none. And when we dug in a little bit deeper, we were having a good conversation at the beginning of the year around that. And we kind of said, well, what do these people look like? What was the standout attribute of those 14% was they were 96% strongly agree with the statement, I'm clear about my career goals in the next 3 to 5 years. So this concept that clarity creates confidence, I think is crucial. We know it. Chapter 1 of Core Confidence is all about get clear. So I think there's some interesting stuff that's playing out there.
Yes, absolutely. The more we see people get clear about what it is they want to do in context of their career, the more they're able to step into their power and own their value and actually contribute more to the organisation.
Yeah. So let's look at what came up as barriers. Clarity, unsurprisingly. So 38% of women said, I'm not clear about what I actually want in context of career goals. This is an interesting one because when we do this, when we go and do Core Confidence Lunch and Learns, we repeat kind of this question. What's interesting in terms of hands up is the data almost, as much as we can tell, is practically, it replicates. And so the clarity one is interesting. You made some really good comments this morning about that. Do you want to share those?
Yeah, look, a couple of things we notice around clarity is that, once I get clear about what I want, it means I have to say no to certain things. And that can feel a bit painful. It can almost feel a bit like a loss. I won't be able to do that. And it may not be you won't do it ever, but you may not be able to do it now. So that clarity is about choice and saying no to some things and as we say, it can feel a bit uncomfortable. The other piece is when we get clear, we're normally sharing that with a few people. We may well be sharing it with a boss, with some peers, with family, with friends. And we have to take the responsibility of actually doing what we said we would do. And that can also feel somewhat uncomfortable. So we know that a couple of things are playing out underneath this, responsibility and that fear of, missing out on something, I think, is part of what's going on.
Yeah. And the one I love, I guess I love this one because realistically, there's so much you can do to navigate around this. But the key word there is you actually have to do. My observation is a lot of people are waiting for answers to fall out of the sky, to get clear about what they want or for opportunities to come through their organisation. And, you need to get in the driver's seat here, for sure. The second one, I don't have the internal relationships and influence to progress. So this is 29%. I think this one's really interesting, particularly when we talk about mentoring and sponsorship and the role that that's playing in supporting women up the pipeline.
Yeah, it's fascinating to us that despite, again, organisations trying a lot of things and really, I think, recognising that this is an issue, it still seems for a lot of women that they just don't have those networks, those relationships. And sometimes it's that they're prioritising getting the work done, they're focusing on delivery and that sort of thing, and they're not recognising that just as important in their role and in the work they're doing is to build those relationships so they can be recognised for their work and so they can actually get further opportunities.
Yeah, that's a good segue into the next one, which we weren't surprised to see because, we've written Core Confidence, we've been in confidence, the subject confidence for years, but I don't have the confidence to apply for the career progression opportunities I want at the moment. Really circling back to that, the loyalty and confidence piece we shared before, which is, I don't want to be rejected. I don't think I've got the skill, capability and experience to get particular roles as well. But, I think if you're new to our work or new to us, this one is really significant. And what we see is really underpins all of these 5 aspects. Number 4.
Yes. So, 24% of people were saying that, I have to compromise, in my work if I'm, I have to, I feel I'm going to make a compromise, and that is a barrier to my career progression.
Yeah, so this whole thing of I'm not willing to compromise other areas of my life, be it family, be it hobbies, horse riding. I've got clients that are horse riding, in order to achieve my desired career progression. I think the thing here though is a lot of it's assumed. And so when I work individually with clients, I'm always saying, okay, cool. What's your ideal, work and life balance look like? And I go, okay, cool. Now let's go and have a conversation and negotiate that and actually see whether that's possible. Yes, there's going to be some, we're going to need to give and be flexible a little bit. But in my experience, most of it's assumed. Yes. Rather than. And so, I think probably the 24 is probably really the normalized number is 15.
Yes, yeah, there's a lot of assumptions in there that I won't be able to do something, and sometimes we're just not asking for the possibility.
Yeah, got to ask, to get a no. And the last one, again, we've talked about this already, but I don't have the skills and experience to apply for the career progressions I see. I think, to my point earlier, I think this is the real number here is probably around 9 or 10. I think we're overstating what we seem to perceive is required of a particular role, as we assume a lot. And often particularly when you're outside looking in at a role description, when you don't understand something, it's difficult to be able to self-assess as to whether I can do this. So I think a lot of it is, that sounds hard, looks hard, I don't know it. I guess I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, a lot of that comes back to the confidence piece, and it's also can be a bit of a out clause. If I don't have the skills and experience, then I don't even have to apply. So
yeah, so this is a big one. I think there's lots you can do in organisations and individuals. I think there's lots of work around as organisations. How do we support women to get that clarity and actually start to navigate some of the dynamics, start to reach out, risk rejection in terms of connecting in with relationships. Go and have those conversations. We're just talking around, this isn't working for me. How can we do it different? So I think underpinning it all, there's a big piece around confidence.
Yes.
So that's career progression. Let's move on to talk about gender pay gap. Again, another favourite of mine, probably my favourite subject for many reasons. Some good, promising data coming through that 70% of women believe that management at their organisation genuinely support equality between men and women. So, my organisation thinks this is important. However, only 40% believe women and men are paid the same rates for performing similar work. It's a difficult one because often we don't have the proximity of the information to make a good, informed view to answer the question. But what do you think is going on here?
Well, yes, and we talk a lot about this in terms of transparency. We just don't know, and in the absence of information from our organisations, we start making up stories, or we have an assumption that this is going on, and it is a perception. But for a lot of people, they really feel as though they are paid a lot less than other people in their organisation doing similar or the same work. So it's important that organisations address this. We think really on a practical level, this is quite easy. It's a mathematical calculation. We should be able to work it out and change it so that we do have gender pay parity across the organisation. But we seem to run into a lot of murky waters, and it gets very tricky as to why we don't do this. I mean, some companies have, and they've actually used that as, I think, a really powerful brand positioning piece and talking up their the success of this. But it still comes up too often in conversations. Really.
So in the survey we asked, do you think you're fairly remunerated? So unsurprisingly, when we look at results in normal engagement data, no one ever thinks they're paid enough. So only 39% of women felt that they're fairly remunerated for the contribution they make to their current role. So probably not unsurprising. We then asked, how much do you think you're underpaid? So 52% believe they're underpaid by 10% or more. That's pretty big. Again, not inconsistent with what we hear when we're out talking with women that we work with. Here is the kicker. Only 48% of those 52, so those women who feel like they're underpaid by 10% or more, less than half have had a conversation with their manager about pay in the last 12 months. So this comes back to women don't ask. And we know this. We're often coaching and supporting clients to have some of these tough conversations, which feel more like a fight. If I'm honest about this, it feels like a fight. They take 3 months. Then very rarely, I think there's only ever been one that's a positive experience. And, you know, I want a context here that the REM conversations I'm talking about are $20,000, $30,000 pay rises. We're not talking about 5, but they're a fight, and they feel uncomfortable. And even when you get the money at the end as the individual negotiating, it's quite disengaging.
Yeah, it's such a pity, really, because this is such an opportunity for organisations to really up the ante in terms of women owning their value and having their place in the organisation. And, you know, if women are prepared to ask, they are going to face some discomfort. We know that. There's no doubt about that. But in a way, that's resilience building. It's good. It's strengthening to actually be prepared for, yes, I'm going to own my value and I'm going to speak up about it and I'm going to ask for what I deserve and what I want.
Yeah. And look, you know, there's preparation that's required. We don't just say walk in and open up the dialogue. There's preparation that's required. There's, you know, the business case or the value stack, so you can articulate your value and your contribution, you know, well. So there's work to be done before you walk into these conversations. And even when you do that, then they still have the potential to be quite difficult as well. So that's gender pay gap. Let's get to, I guess, the really interesting topic that got a lot of conversation, discussion and attention this morning, and that's all around bullying and harassment. There's no doubt that, you know, globally this conversation has elevated over the last few years, and, you know, we've been talking about whether there's more behaviour that's inappropriate or whether we're just talking more about it. But I think when we looked at the data, here's some of what we found.
Yes, you know, fascinating that 71% of participants said that they had experienced some form of bullying or sexual harassment in the workplace. And that sounds high, but it actually aligns with other data that's been released in the last little while. At the end of last year, the Australian Human Rights Commission came out with some equally compelling data about the prevalence and actually the increase in reporting of sexual harassment from 2012 to 2018. And the Law Society too has just reported on this, and an incredibly high incidence of harassment and bullying in their workplace as well. So disturbing, really, that it's still this high, I think.
Yeah. And look, you can see on screen, you know, a number of different, we kind of looked at a number of different behaviours within kind of the remit of what constitutes bullying and harassment. You can see kind of intimidation through to what you see there, which is, you know, deliberately holding back information. I think the one that concerned me the most was the sexual harassment one. So that 29% of women have been exposed to sexual harassment, and we were very specific to define exactly what we mean with this one, so that there wasn't any grey area, no overinflated results. And we said, you know, sexual harassment, i.e. unwelcome touching, sexually explicit comments and requests that make you feel uncomfortable. And so I think when we looked into the data, because my hypothesis here was, you know, at some point over a 20 or 30 year career, it's likely you're going to be exposed to bullying. That's probably a yes. You know, it may be likely you're exposed to sexual harassment. But when we went and looked at the age split on this, more than half of these women who had been exposed to sexual harassment were aged between 26 and 36. And these are often the women that don't necessarily have the power to speak up, the ones that, if they did, are risking career and positioning and, you know, all of those sorts of things. So women who feel like, you know, probably are least safe to be able to call this out.
Yeah, this is disturbing, and we know that there's a power imbalance very often, or nearly always, in a sexual harassment situation. So the fact that it is a group of people who are vulnerable and feel unsafe and can't call it out, or feel as though they can't call it out easily, is quite worrying.
Yeah, and I think you know, this next piece actually, which talks about calling out and reporting behaviour, I suspect the 72% could be a little bit overinflated in terms of, you know, 72% I feel comfortable calling out inappropriate behaviour in the workplace. But what we know is that, you know, I think that's it, because if you've never been in that situation, you never really know. So I think that's an interesting one. I think the next piece that caused a lot of, I guess, there was some good discussion in the room, yes, which is only 20% have reported this formally to a manager of a HR division. And I think we really talked here to risk of the individual. Is it safe? And, you know, I think it's challenging. And where we really landed was, you know, and had some great stories in the room of, you know, how we can deal with this differently, because it's not so much a HR issue, it's a leader issue.
It's definitely a leadership issue. It's about culture in organizations. It's about being able to call it out, but not necessarily going down a really adversarial path, because we know that actually really works for either party, and it feels pretty uncomfortable for everybody, and it makes it less likely that other people will do it. But one of the examples we heard, and we see quite often, is if a leader is aware that someone is behaving inappropriately, or is doing something, bullying for instance, that they can actually refer to the values of the organization or the charter of the organization and say, hang on, this is just not in line with the way we do things around here. This is not the culture we're seeking to foster. So you can do it in quite a gentle way that is very contextual to your organization, but doesn't make them wrong. It makes the behavior wrong.
Yeah, nice one. And look, it's certainly not that we're advocating that you shouldn't necessarily report it through to HR. The data shows us that people don't. They don't think it's safe, and they don't think it's effective. And I guess the mirror, I would suggest, and I think HR's burdened in this place, because
it's very hard.
The minute it's reported, they have to go through formal process. It's a work health safety issue. It's difficult. So they're burdened in terms of how they can, what their options are. And I think, the ability to translate it across the organisation. Go and have a look at how much is reported in your organisation. When you compare it to the fact that 71% have been exposed, I suspect you'd have, the number of the percentage that's been reported would be quite slim in most organisations. Interestingly, though, and not surprising, of those who have reported a bullying experience, only 28% were satisfied with the handling of the complaint. So in general, the experience of people who do actually, go through the formal process is not a positive one.
Yeah, this is disturbing and difficult, but what we did here, and I think this is quite an interesting suggestion, is what if this wasn't an HR issue? What if this sat with the CEO and we were actually really going to address this as a whole of organisation thing? We're going to say, this is not what we want to do, and we want to find ways to make sure that this is not happening in our organisation, but we're not going to lump it into HR, which becomes complicated. When HR has so many other responsibilities around people, it can feel very difficult. Whereas I think if the CEO's office was prepared to take it on, there's a lot that could happen there, and we could shift things quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think it's leader behaviour. It's human behaviour, and so I think when you look at the different examples of bullying and harassment, it's behavioural issues, and it's the responsibility of all leaders. So I guess they're the key pieces that came up through the research. If you haven't downloaded a copy, please jump on the YPWA website. There's an icon, the Women at Work icon there. Click on that. You can download a copy as well. What can you do with this? I guess in page 14 of the report, we talk about some of the things that you can start to do within your organisation, whether you would like to run an equivalent Women at Work survey within your organisation to find out what's going on. I think my view is data and story can create leverage, significant leverage to drive change. And I think sometimes there's a little bit of an apathy around this conversation at the moment, gender equality. There's a lot of talk, not a lot of action. So data certainly can make a difference.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of things that we do with organisations. Deep dive in with people within the organisation, some focus groups, unpacking. What's really interesting is what men have to say on this topic. So, it's curious to us that, there's so much great intelligence within the organisation. We could be using that to really shift some of these things that we know are not as positive as we'd like them to be.
And look, if there's only one thing that you do, having listened to this or looked at the research, on page 16, we've got a discussion guide, so questions for a leader roundtable. So to take some of these things, have some of the senior people, or mix it up, some junior and senior people in the room, as long as it's safe for them to speak up, and talk about what is going on in your organisation, and really look at what can we do at a tangible level, at an organisational level, but also at an individual level, to really start to drive change in organisations.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here, guys. Please reach out if you've got questions, if you need some support in your organisation. We'd love to help with that.